from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
It is a very great pleasure to welcome you to the program today, and from time to time on this forum we deal with a subject that we've never dealt with, even though we've been on the air now into our 27th year, and that is the occasion today. Our topic is service learning, and we're most fortunate as we deal with this very exciting program that's in our K-12 schools in the United States as well as higher education, to have with us an expert in this field. I welcome to the program Terry Pickerell, who is from Bellingham, Washington, and he is the president of Cascade Educational Consultants. Our guest does work with K-12 and higher education institutions to advance what we are describing as service learning as an effective teaching, learning, serving, and community building strategy. I am particularly pleased that our guest is also a consultant and assisting an organization that I'm a commissioner within that organization called the Education Commission of the States, which represents commissioners from all over the United States, and the governors of our states are very involved as acting commissioners. In particularly in that role, he is assisting in developing and enhancing the Compact for Learning and Citizenship, which is a national K-12 service learning collaboration of chief state school officials and district superintendents. Our guest has written a number of books, articles, and chapters on service learning, school, community collaborations, effective strategies for volunteers in schools, and strategies to develop statewide service learning. Our guest holds a baccalaureate degree from the University of Hawaii and a master's degree from the University of British Columbia. Terry, I met you in Portland at the commission of the state's meeting and was so impressed, and thank you for the time you spent with our staff and faculty at North Idaho College and appearing today on our program. It's a delightful opportunity to talk with you.
Thanks, Tony. It's great to be here.
And I'm very pleased to have a special panelist with me today, my friend Kathy Christie, who is the Assistant Vice President for Instruction at North Idaho College, and I should add that she's in charge of service learning at North Idaho College and doing a very effective job. And welcome to the program, Kathy.
Thank you, Tony.
And we'll ask you to commence today's questioning.
Thank you. Terry, let's start by asking you how you became involved in service learning, and then perhaps tell us a little bit about what service learning is.
Yeah, I think like most of the people in America, I started by volunteering in Boy Scouts, church groups. So something I did as a youth was that I volunteered. We lived on a farm in Arizona. My father brought home citrus in the winter and melons in the summer and asked us kids to distribute them to the neighbors. So I grew up in an environment about doing service. In the 1980s, I was working in some programs with high-risk youth, and one of the things that we began to do with the young people is engage them in service. Mm-hmm. And we thought it was important for them to feel like they were competent to do something. So they would go out in the community and they would do Habitat for Humanity or work on stream restoration. And then suddenly one day, a friend of mine said, what you're really doing is service learning, because what you're doing is combining the service that the students are doing with the learning that they're getting in the classroom. And I guess the best definition of service learning is that it's high-quality service that meets a need in the community, done by students, that's linked to the curriculum in the classroom. So it's not just an isolated or extracurricular event that happens, but it's something really tied to the academic study that the students are involved in.
So, Terry, in that way, service learning is slightly different from volunteerism or internships, is that right?
Right. I think volunteerism is great. It's one of the things America is known for, is for its charitable acts, the habits of the heart. And what we want to do is move the habits of the heart to the habit of the mind, so that there's a connection between what you're doing in the community, the service opportunity that you're engaged in, and also the learning that's attached to. And not just learning from the academic perspective, but also in terms of citizenship, civic participation, and other things that come out of doing service for others and with others. And so I think the big difference between service learning and some of the other things of service or internships is really the link to the curriculum in terms of the academic and then some of the other things that we're trying to get young people to be engaged in.
It sounds as if service learning could be operated on all levels of education. Could you tell us a little bit about what is happening perhaps in the K-12 system and also in higher education?
I think one of the nice things about service learning is it's a thread that runs throughout. It can work for homeschooled youth. It can be involved in out-of-school youth and in other programs, job creation programs, etc. I've been working in programs in Hudson, Massachusetts, for example, that involve pre-K students. They have a pre-K center that's a service learning center where students go for 3 hours a day. And part of what they do in their service learning is work with the elderly citizens across the street in a convalescent home. And the day I was in there last January, they were knitting mittens and putting them on a mitten tree, much like you would at Christmas time with gifts for some of the underprivileged children. I think in elementary school, it's relatively easy to get young people, get kids involved in doing service. The challenge really is how do you get the teachers to link that service they're doing with the academic activity. So if you're learning about citizenship or you're learning about history, how can you have students involved in a project like doing oral histories and make sure it's connected to the curriculum? Middle school, wonderful 14, 15-year-old young people, many of them want to be involved in ecological and environmental programs, and so for many times it's interesting and easy to get them involved and link it to the sciences and oftentimes language arts. In high school, a lot of school districts look at service learning as part of their school-to-work program and getting young people to understand how you can also work in nonprofit organizations. And then the burgeoning side of this is in higher education, where 2-year and 4-year colleges over the last 10 years have just grown exponentially in terms of engaging service learning into their curriculum.
Thank you.
I don't want to follow up on Kathy's questions. They were excellent questions, and if we can share with our viewers, who I suspect in most cases are not familiar with these programs, if they're not in education, or even a lot of educators are not involved. As we talked this morning when Kathy held a meeting in relation to your appearance here, for the educators, isn't there a lot of preparation? It's not one of those situations where you simply say to each student, we've made an assignment like you do in maybe an internship, and you go out and work this semester and then come back and write a 4-page paper for me. Talk some about what you just mentioned about how you so carefully prepare the process and integrate it into the curriculum that it's very much a requirement for completing the course and part of the grading system.
Right. I think that one of the big issues is around preparation and readiness. And in service learning, we talk about 4 components: preparation, action, reflection, and celebration. And those last 3 will only be as good as your preparation is. So preparation really is preparing your curriculum so that it's meaningful for young people, preparing the community to receive the young people that are going to be engaged in the community. How do you work with a nonprofit organization to understand the needs of young people and also their contributions that they can do for that?
So if I can just interrupt, not only are the administrators and the faculty preparing, but if you don't have on the other end some awareness by the institutions, it cannot work either. They have things that they have to be aware of and do too.
Absolutely.
To implement the program.
Right. I think it's a balance between what we need in terms of school and what the community needs. And many times in school we say, we're going to do something for you. And what I think we want to do in service learning is equal it up, so we want to do something with you. So how can young people help a nonprofit agency or a public group in a community as opposed to doing something merely to them, doing something with them. And that does take a paradigm shift for teachers as well, because what it means is no longer the teacher is the sole manager of the student learning. It also puts some of that management into the hands of people in the community. And to me, Tony, it's one of the neat things, because we talk about public education, but it seems to me over the years that the public has been here and education has been there, and it's one of the ways of getting the public re-engaged in public education is by supporting these kinds of programs.
So a collaborative process on
Absolutely.
both ends.
Critical.
Then the next question is, and I think this is at the very heart of service learning, which I'm an advocate of and support, and you certainly have contributed to my optimism. Tell us from the experiences in your consulting with many different groups and organizations, what does it do for the student? What does it do for the college or school? And what does it do for the community? I mean, you're at the point now where you're seeing the results of what this really does. What's at the heart of the result?
Well, I think at the heart of it, we have a lot of research that demonstrates that it has an impact on students' academic competency. And we have research that shows it has a lot to do with critical decision making. We have research that shows that it helps in group thinking skills, which are some of the things that employers want, is the capacity to think well and to work well in groups. But it also really gets to the heart of caring and compassion and citizenship. And when public education began in the 1600s in America, it was about citizenship. And I think it gets young people back into being active citizens today. And we often talk about future leaders. But there's wonderful young people that can be leaders today, that can be citizens today. And citizenship isn't just voting. It's making your community a healthier and safer place to be. So the benefit for students is certainly academic, certainly personal, and certainly social. The benefit for the school, the college, or the K-12 school is that it begins to make that a more engaging place to learn. It expands the classroom so students are more excited about coming. We have some evidence that students, there was a school I worked with that 82% of the students came on service learning days, but only 42% came on regular school days. So what we did is we had service learning every day, and we ended up with 82% of students coming each day because they wanted to do service learning. So it expands the classroom, it makes it a more engaging place, and it also allows teachers to really burn that fire within them of their compassion to really want to help young people. And I think it really ignites something in teachers of saying, this is why I wanted to be a teacher. And then for our communities, it certainly gets them to look at young people differently. Many times today we're looking at young people and being suspicious of them and afraid of them and not really caring for them. And by seeing young people in the community planting trees, cleaning up trash, developing parks, mentoring, tutoring, writing books, doing concerts, that the community begins to look at young people in a very different, positive light.
And would you share with us what you did earlier at an institution that you worked at, what it does even almost from a financial contribution to the community, the number of hours, and if you indicated that from a financial viewpoint?
Yeah. At Western Washington University in the mid-90s, we did a count and found that over 4,400 students were involved in service learning. And on the average, that each of them were contributing 15 hours. And what we did is we got with the Points of Lights Foundation and found that the average hour of volunteerism was worth about $11. So when you figured that out, it was a multi-million-dollar contribution that college students were making in a community. And while I think that's an important issue, I think it is a way of getting the community to recognize this is something that's really important to our community, and it's meeting needs that otherwise would not be met. The other thing it does is really get young people to have a voice in our communities. And many times as adults, we ask students to choose something that we've developed. And in service learning, we really try to get students to develop their own menu of choices. And so it's not just something that Tony and Kathy and Terry thought was a good idea, but it's getting young people to say, there's a need in our community, here's a way we'd like to meet it. And I think that's really at the root of this. It's giving young people an opportunity to lead and to make choices today.
One final question, then I'll go back to Kathy, and that is that when grades go up and there's less absence and there's excitement and involvement, that has to impact the juvenile delinquency issue or crime. And as young people are busy and interested, aren't you, with this program, also rallying them into a more positive approach, those that would be inclined not to be positive?
I think we have some evidence, and a lot of people talk about resiliency. How can students overcome certain barriers? And in resiliency, you need to feel competent, potent, and a sense of belonging. And service learning gives young people that sense of belonging, that sense of contribution and potency. I did something. I saw the result of that. I read to a young boy. He now understands better. I planted a tree. It's still standing. I erased the graffiti. That gives a young person a sense of purpose. And we find young people with a sense of purpose rarely are engaged in violent acts.
Yes. Kathy, Christy.
Terry, you mentioned earlier that one of the primary components of service learning is the activity called reflection. Could you talk a little bit more about what that is and why it's so important and how it links the actual community service with the classroom work?
I think what it does is takes the service and the learning and really puts the hyphen between them and joins them. Reflection is a mere activity that allows people to ask certain questions after they've done the service. And the questions are, what did I do? What did I learn? How do I feel? And what am I going to do now? Mm-hmm. And so, for example, if the three of us went out and worked in a stream enhancement project, and on the way back in the car, we would begin to talk about our experience and say, what did we do? You know, what we really did is we engaged ourselves in an activity that's ongoing, but we helped today. What did we learn? We learned about the planting of trees near riverbeds and away from riverbeds, the shade that's needed in trees. How do we feel? We felt really cool. We felt great because we did something worthwhile. But we also felt a little bit sad because we can't do it more often. Mm-hmm. And then what are we going to do as a subsequent to that? What we're going to do is maybe join up with an environmental agency or be a more advocate, or maybe what we're going to do is more recycling, mm-hmm. so that some of the stream beds don't get some of the things that we do. I think the easiest way of doing reflection, or at least one that's normal and most practiced, is journal writing. Mm-hmm. So after you do an activity, then you would write in a journal, what did I do, what did I learn, how do I feel, and what am I going to do? But there's many other ways. You can write a song about it, you could do a mural, you could do some kind of photography, you could draw a picture. or you could have discussions like we're having today about how we felt and the subsequent impact that that's going to have on our lives.
Mm-hmm. Because service learning is really active learning in its very best form, from your perspective, how is this educational pedagogy helping or changing how students learn and how teachers teach?
I think it's a real important question. There's a real difference, not just in education but in our lives, between being exposed to something and being engaged in something. And I think we have very proficient teachers that expose young people to wonderful resources. When you want to hear the history of Idaho or Washington or the Lewis and Clark Trail, you can go to a website, you can bring in people to talk to you about it. There's wonderful resources, but that's exposing kids to things. But if you got, in that case, young people to go out and interview people who have been pioneers in the area to help recreate trails on the Lewis and Clark Trail, and to really be engaged in something, how much more you learn from that. So I think one thing for the students is being engaged in something makes learning real. Yes. And for the teachers, I think it validates that what they're teaching in the classroom is the appropriate thing to teach. So to me, it's an issue of moving from an exposure-based teaching and learning to an exposure and engagement-based teaching and learning, which to me makes it more real and gives students the opportunity never to ask the question, why? I think it allows them to answer the question, this is why you need to learn geometry. In one project we did, students were building dog houses for a humane society out of a math class. And in all three dog houses, as they put the ceilings or the roofs together, they didn't match. And the students immediately understood why angles are important. Mm-hmm. And they went back and redid the roofs to make them match, this time being much more precise in their measurement. Mm-hmm. So I think it's engagement and exposure that changes some of the paradigms of teaching and learning.
Are there certain disciplines that service learning lends itself to, or can it be done in any subject area?
There's certain ones that I think are more traditionally ready to do service learning. The social sciences, certainly political science, sociology. I'm a sociologist and I use it in my classes, anthropology. But more and more over the last 3 or 4 years there's been some national movements to get faculty from the sciences, engineering, architecture, math, and computer science engaged in service learning. So I think it has the capacity to be infused in any discipline. I think a couple things. The faculty member has to be trained and ready. Mm-hmm. The community has to be trained and ready, and the service has to be meaningful and purposeful. So I think it has the capacity to be engaged in any or integrated into any discipline on our colleges or even in any discipline in our K-12 systems.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I want to follow up on that again too. Since we have your resources and the data that you have available, you suggested this in answering the last question, and that is when individuals go out and engage in service learning, and I would contend also in the classroom where you have simulations, that the fact that you are active and participating, that the retention level is so much higher. What kind of data are in concerning that retention rate?
Well, we have some data from K-12 from 2 national studies that demonstrate that students in a class that uses service learning, when compared to students in a very similar class not using service learning, that there's higher academic achievement. And the higher academic achievement is not just in the course content, so they would learn more about biology, but it's also in terms of academic engagement and academic educational achievement that they want to do. We've found students in middle schools that never thought about going to college before, but they've been out with high school and with college students working in a stream bed of saying, hey, I could go to college, I could do this as a college student. We have evidence of those anecdotal evidence of those kinds of aspiration data, but we also have data that students who are in service learning courses do have higher skills in terms of course content and also higher grades out of that.
Yeah, that's a very significant point. And the second part of my question is that once individuals become excited about a project such as this, and it relates back to the entire requirement of the course or the curriculum, are they willing to take on more work even if it's not assigned?
Well, I think one of the outcomes of service learning is developing an ethic of service. And it's part of that reflection question, saying, what am I going to do now? And what we find, and Kathy and I were talking today about some of the students here at North Idaho College, they were talking about being paired up with a conversational partner, and after the course was over, they're still with that partner. So I think what it does is one, give them an ethic of service kind of generally, but then also that they're performing a needed service in the community, and they don't want to stop doing that. And so I think it does do both the behaviors of an ethic of service, but also the direct behavior of serving somebody in some capacity.
I have one more question, and I was so intrigued, and I give Kathy the credit for this. At North Idaho College, there's something that I learned today that I wasn't aware of that is on the horizon as a possibility. And that is, I was aware that two of our fine faculty are teaching two separate courses, but they are also working together, and the service learning is incorporated in both those courses, and those faculty members are attending one of the classes, and each student must sign up for both classes, which is over rather several hours time. But then it was suggested that maybe the third faculty member was going to come in and join in, and these are in different disciplines. So I came away with the idea that you could set up a program for a student, a group of students, excuse me, and they would have their entire program for a semester together, all their courses, taking the same classes, kind of like law school, they'd be together, and they would do all their service learning. Is that a potential model on the horizon to where it would not be for every student, but it would be an option for some students?
I think it holds much promise. I think it holds promise not just for the student, but also for the faculty. One of the things we have in higher education is faculty are usually aligned with their discipline more than anything else. Yeah. And this gets them to look at other disciplines. And the example you were talking about, a communications faculty and a sociology faculty teaching family and marriage. I mean, what a wonderful opportunity to blend my knowledge as a sociologist, your knowledge as a communicator, and getting young people in our classes to understand how those match. I think what you're talking about is very critical. I think it's developing learning communities, and it's developing an affinity of young people who go through and have and do activities. And the nice thing about what you're suggesting is they could do one activity. Maybe they would work in a tutoring project, but it would have outcomes for sociology, outcomes for philosophy, outcomes for communications, and outcomes for physics. And they could blend all of those things into that. Because life is like that. We don't go driving a car down the road and saying, I'm going to use my analytical skills now about how fast I can go and use my math skills about how long it's going to take me to get there. What we do is have a holistic approach to life. And I think what you're talking about would do that. The second thing it would do, I guess the third thing, because it would impact faculty in positive ways. The third thing it would do is make young people more persistent. It would give them an opportunity to really want to stay in college because they're part of a team. And we know many youngsters, many college students drop out of college because they feel no affinity with other people or to the college. And this would be one way of showing them how important it is that they stay with their studies and stay in the institution. So persistent studies that we have out of higher ed also demonstrate that if the more affinity you feel with the community, the more you'll stay in the college.
It's almost like a second family for them too, with obligations in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Kathy Christie.
Terry, along that same line, some of the faculty we were talking with earlier were describing in this linked course how the students developed a different sense of responsibility to, you mentioned their conversational partner, which was an elderly person in that particular course, and how that sense of responsibility was shared or was increased because they were involved in that activity. Could you talk a little bit more about that as far as what kinds of programs might have intergenerational aspects to them?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on both the personal responsibility and also the social responsibility, which is back to the earlier question Tony asked. But I think all of us need to feel competent and feel like we belong to something. And taking personal responsibility to me means that you have not just the capacity, but also the inner strength to do things that maybe you normally wouldn't do. And some of the kinds of projects, like intergenerational projects, are very hard for some students. I was working with some third graders in Alaska one time, and I said, we're going to go to a senior citizens home. And one of the third graders tugged on my coat and said, I don't want to go. I said, why not? And he said, people die there. And what we did is we worked with the young man and explained to him who was there, and that was a possibility but not a probability. And it was very good to see the teacher sit down with that young person and talk about the choices that he or she had, or he had, in terms of coming to that project or not. I think the kinds of things in higher education that I see where there's personal responsibility taken is especially in college students mentoring high school students and maybe junior high or elementary school students. There's something about college students that really like younger kids, and I think that's one of those balancing acts of where the college student learns by tutoring, but also the high school or the elementary student learns by being with a college student. And then having the college student working with the elderly, it really begins to reattach kind of this extended family. It gives a sense of community that Tony was talking about. And I think in terms of personal responsibility, it's about where do I fit? Where do I fit in this? What services are required of me? What services can I provide? And I think it's real critical in personal responsibility and service learning is that fit. How do I fit? What am I doing? And to always learn that what you're doing has consequences, positively and negative, for other people and for yourself.
We talked earlier today about a very exciting program that was matching 7-year-olds with seniors, helping them with computer literacy. Could you tell just a little bit about that?
7-year-old helping the senior citizens.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's a great project. There's a similar one in Issaquah, Washington, and there's one in Bellingham, Washington. The third graders learn about internet, and they become internet navigators. They become proficient in using the internet. And what the teachers decided they wanted to do is they wanted to use that experience and that expertise they had. So he invited in busloads of senior citizens. And so as a senior citizen would come off of the bus, each of the 7-year-olds would attach themselves to one. And that would be their senior for the day. Sit them down in front of a screen and say, we're going to go on the internet. We're going to search websites. Well, many of the older seniors wanted to look at genealogy websites, of which these kids didn't know much about. Well, the first thing we found out is the kids would guide them through how you use the internet, but they had no patience for anybody's inability to click onto a screen immediately. And so they would say, push enter. And if the senior didn't do it immediately, then the junior would push enter for them. So we told them to put their hands behind their back and not to touch the screen or touch the keyboard. That didn't stop them. They would do it with their elbow or do it with their shoulder or try to do it with their face or chin. But it was wonderful to see these youngsters teaching the seniors how to use the internet to find things that were important to them. But what was also interesting is what the youngsters learned about family. And many of those youngsters went home and talked to their family about genealogy and where did they come from and where were their ancestors. And it was this wonderful project that, again, technology we often think isn't connected to service. And this is an example of how technology and service go very well together.
We're just out of time. We just have a few seconds. But how you like your work with Education Commission of the States? And are they doing a lot in this area?
One of the things Education Commission of States is doing is looking at policy to support and encourage service learning. And I think that's the next big step we need to take, that we have service learning resting on the backs of wonderful teachers and faculty, but what we really want to do is see how administrators and the community can become to support it through policy.
On that note, Terry Piccarell, we'll have to bring our program to conclusion. You've been so wonderful on the program and so informative on this subject, and I know our viewers have learned a lot about something that's really going to be very important in the future, and we appreciate you coming and giving us all this time today.
Thanks, Tony and Kathy.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you found this program very informative, and I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week. At that time, we will move to a different issue, as we do from week to week, and discuss something we think that you also will find informative and helpful to you. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.